My name is Madison Carter. I am 29 years old, and last Friday evening I stood at the front of a banquet hall in front of 150 people, my company's CEO, my colleagues, senior leadership, and my family while my name was read aloud for the first time as Senior Vice President of Callaway and Associates. I had spent 6 years building toward that moment. 6 years of early mornings, skipped weekends, and long nights at my desk when everyone else had already gone home. And in the middle of that room, in front of every person whose professional opinion of me mattered, my father slowly pushed back his chair, stood up, and raised his voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "She bought that degree," he said. "Every single one of you deserves to know that." 150 people went completely silent. My boss froze mid-applause. And then, from the center of the room, my former professor slowly stood up. But before I tell you what he said, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me your country in the comments. Now, let's begin. Growing up, I was never the one my father talked about proudly. That was always my older brother, Derek. Derek got the car on his 16th birthday. Derek got the long conversations at the dinner table about his future. Derek was the one my father took to baseball games on Sunday afternoons while I stayed home and figured things out on my own. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because it explains everything that came after. My mother passed away when I was 15. After that, the distance between my father and me became something permanent. He buried himself in work at his hardware store. I buried myself in school. We lived in the same house for 3 years after that, and somehow barely spoke. When I told him I wanted to apply to Northwestern University, he looked at me over the top of his coffee mug and said, "That's a lot of money for something that might not work out." I applied anyway. My first year, I worked 2 jobs to cover what my financial aid didn't. Weekday mornings, I was at a diner 4 blocks from campus, on my feet from 5 a.m. until 9, then walking straight to my 8:30 lecture still smelling like coffee and dish soap. On weekends, I worked retail. I studied on bus rides and during my lunch breaks and at the kitchen table of the tiny apartment I shared with 2 other students. I slept maybe 5 hours most nights. At the end of that year, my GPA was 3.97. My professor, Dr. James Whitfield, called me into his office in May. He was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s who had been teaching financial analysis for nearly 3 decades. He sat across from me and told me, very calmly, that the department's academic committee had nominated me for the merit scholarship. Full tuition. 2nd year, completely covered. Not because I had applied for it, because my professors had recommended me without being asked. I sat in that chair and tried very hard not to cry. I called my father that evening to tell him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't get too comfortable. These things don't usually last." I graduated 4 years later with honors. My senior thesis, a financial risk analysis that Dr. Whitfield had supervised personally, was accepted for publication in a regional academic journal. At the graduation ceremony, Dr. Whitfield stood at the podium and said my name in front of 3,000 people as the department's outstanding graduate of the year. My father did not come to graduation. He said he had to work. After college, I joined Callaway and Associates as a junior analyst. I worked my way up steadily over 6 years, first to analyst, then senior analyst, then director. I was known in the office for being thorough, calm under pressure, and someone who stayed until the work was done right. When the CEO, Mr. Harrison Blake, told me privately that my promotion to senior vice president was being announced at the company's annual recognition dinner, I felt something I had worked my entire adult life to feel. I had earned it, and I knew exactly what it had cost. I invited my father to the dinner because, despite everything, I still wanted him to see it. I still believed that maybe after all this time, watching it happen in person would mean something to him. Dr. Whitfield also attended. He had stayed close over the years, a mentor, a reference, and eventually something closer to a friend. When I told him about The promotion, he asked if he could come. I told him I would be honored. I should have known my father and I were always heading toward a moment like this one. I just didn't expect it to happen in front of 150 people. The banquet hall at the Meridian Hotel was everything the occasion called for. Round tables draped in white linen, soft warm lighting, the quiet sound of a string quartet near the entrance. Glasses of champagne moved through the room, on silver trays. My team sat near the front, laughing and talking easily the way people do when they feel genuinely celebrated. Dr. Whitfield was seated near the center of the room, a dark blue folder on the table beside his dinner plate. I remember noticing it when I passed his table earlier and thinking he had probably brought notes for the evening. He always had notes. My father and Derek were seated near the back. Mr. Blake stepped to the podium after dinner. He spoke about the company's growth over the past year and about the qualities that defined strong leadership. Then he said my name. I felt the applause before I fully registered that it had started. People stood. Someone near the back gave a loud, sharp whistle. I walked to the podium and shook Mr. Blake's hand and turned to face the room. I was smiling. Then I heard the chair. That slow, deliberate scrape of a chair being pushed back. And then my father's voice, rising above the last ripple of applause. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I think people here have a right to know something about my daughter." The applause stopped. Mr. Blake turned slightly toward the back of the room. My colleagues went still. A few people near my father shifted in their seats. "She didn't earn that degree," my father said. His voice was steady, certain, the voice of a man who had made up his mind long before tonight. "It was paid for. I don't know what this company thinks it's promoting, but the foundation of it isn't what you've been told. You should all be asking how she really got those credentials." The silence that followed was the specific kind that fills a large room when something unexpected and uncomfortable lands in the center of it. My boss stood frozen at the podium, unsure whether to speak. I stood at the front of that hall, and I did not move. I did not argue. I did not explain. I had learned a long time ago that defending yourself to someone who has already made their decision about you only makes you look uncertain. The people who knew me knew the truth, and the person who could speak to that truth better than anyone was sitting 10 feet from my father. I kept my face calm, and I waited. Some of my closest colleagues looked furious on my behalf. Others, people who didn't know me as well, wore expressions I couldn't fully read. Confusion, uncertainty, the particular discomfort of not knowing what to believe. Derek sat beside my father and said nothing. He didn't look surprised. The room held its breath. And then, from the center of the hall, I heard the sound of another chair moving. Dr. James Whitfield stood up slowly. He reached down and picked up the dark blue folder from beside his dinner plate. Then he walked toward the front of the room with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had spent 30 years standing at the front of rooms full of people who understood exactly what this moment required and was not remotely afraid of it. He reached the podium and stood beside me. He opened the folder. "My name is Dr. James Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying clearly across every corner of that silent hall. "I was Madison Carter's professor and academic advisor at Northwestern University for 4 years. I want to make sure everyone in this room has accurate information." He looked down at the first page in the folder. Madison graduated with a grade point average of 3.97. She did not purchase her degree. She did not pay for her credentials. What she did was work harder than almost any student I have taught in 30 years of teaching. He turned a page. At the end of her first year, Madison was awarded the department's full merit scholarship. I want to be specific about what that means. She did not apply for it. She did not ask for it. It was nominated by her professors, by me, and 3 of my colleagues, because her academic performance in the classroom was exceptional enough that we felt she deserved it without being asked. The scholarship covered her full tuition for her remaining 3 years. He lifted a document from the folder and held it up briefly before placing it on the podium. That is the scholarship award letter. The date, the committee signatures, and her name are all on it. He turned another page. Madison's senior thesis was accepted for publication by the Journal of Applied Financial Analysis. I supervised that thesis personally. I read every draft. I know exactly how much work went into it. It was selected for publication because it was genuinely outstanding, not because of who she was, but because of what she had produced. He looked up from the folder and toward the back of the room. I also wrote Madison's letter of recommendation for her position at this company. I wrote it because I was certain, based on 4 years of watching her work, that she would become exactly the kind of professional she has turned out to be. I have that letter in this folder as well, along with her full academic transcript and her graduation honors documentation, if anyone would like to review them. He paused for a moment and then spoke very directly. I was present for every year of Madison Carter's education. I watched her arrive to 8 a.m. lectures after working a morning shift. I watched her submit work that other students would have been proud to produce at half the quality she held herself to. I watched her earn every single thing that has her name on it. He closed the folder quietly. That is what happened, he said. He placed the folder on the podium, nodded once to Mr. Blake, and walked back to his seat. The room did not move. I turned toward the back of the hall. My father was still standing, but something had shifted entirely in his posture. The certainty, the confidence he had walked into the room with was gone. He was holding the back of his chair with one hand. His face had lost all color. He looked like a man who had stepped forward expecting solid ground and found nothing beneath his foot. Derek was staring at the tablecloth. Mr. Blake stepped back to the podium. He cleared his throat once, quietly, and said, "I think we can continue." The applause that followed was longer than the first time, and louder. I shook Mr. Blake's hand again and walked back to my seat. I did not look at my father for the rest of the evening, not out of anger, not to make a point, but because I understood for the first time very clearly that I had spent 29 years trying to be seen by someone who had already decided what he was looking at. My father left before dessert. He didn't say goodbye. 4 days later, he sent me a text message. It said, "I didn't know all of that." I read it once. Then I set my phone down and went back to work. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the people closest to them to finally see what they are worth. I stopped waiting a long time ago. I just didn't know it until a man I had known for 4 years stood up in a room of 150 strangers and said out loud what my own father never could. The people who show up with a folder full of proof of who you are, those are the ones worth making room for. And the ones who show up with doubt, they'll find the truth eventually. It just won't be on their terms.